Okay, let's get this thing on the road.
All right, Bismillah. Okay, can you lower the volume a little bit more on your end? Just so because I can hear myself.
Is that better?
Yep, that's better. Good. Okay, so we're gonna get started just for the sake of time. And whoever joins, great. Ahla sahla, you are welcome. And we will save this inshallah and upload it when we're done for anybody that wants to come back and hear our conversation once more. So first of all, I wanted to start off with a disclaimer that we're not therapists, neither Shayma or I. We're not therapists. We don't claim to be, right? So this isn't a therapy session. This is just a conversation for those who will find benefit in hearing a raw and heartfelt conversation about trauma that is minimized, right? So in our community, we rarely hear people comfortably talking about heartbreak publicly, right? It's usually something that we talk about really privately within really intimate circles, yet it's something that's so common, right? And so several weeks ago, I had posted something because I was just, interacting with a lot of people that were processing different types of heartbreak. And so I posted a thread on my Instagram just asking people to share their experiences. And I got a lot of feedback from a lot of different people. And it seemed that there was so much interest in this conversation. So I wanted to bring it to a discussion. So first of all, I'm just going to kind of go over what we're going to try to talk about within this hour. We'll try to keep it short to an hour, but if we go over and Shayma's cool with staying over, then we will, and you guys can revisit this conversation whenever necessary. So there are different forms of heartbreak, right? And so there's a distinction between grief and heartbreak, right? And so today we're going to focus more on heartbreak, and inshallah tomorrow we'll continue the conversation and we're going to focus more on pain and grief in general. And so the main distinction that I think we need to really, really talk about and recognize with heartbreak as opposed to like other forms of loss is that heartbreak has an element of disappointment, right? Broken trust, a sense of betrayal sometimes, right? Grief, on the other hand, which is also heartbreak is a form of grief, right? Grief can be experienced through different types of loss, right? So sometimes we experience grief when we lose someone we loved, right? So someone, God forbid, passes away that we really care about and we go through severe grief, right? But I think from different conversations I've had with people and through my own experiences, I think that type of grief sometimes or many times is a little easier for some people to accept and process because there's a sense of, okay, this is something that was beyond our control and predestined, like in the case of natural death, for example, right? As opposed to heartbreak being a bit more traumatic because it really, really, really shakes the level of trust that a person has in the rest of the world, right? So there's that sense of disappointment. There's a sense of accountability, right? That usually isn't, that's neglected in the case of heartbreak, that leaves a person kind of looking for a sense of closure. And so we wanted to talk about these things a little bit more in today's conversation. Shayma, sorry, I didn't even start by introducing us. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and just kind of like give your 2 cents on everything?
I just want to say, excuse my chaotic background. I was in the middle of midterms, so if you guys see anything you're not supposed to, it's just a bunch of chaos. I have 2 cats, so they're all over the place. But yeah, like Ma'ali said, this is in no shape, form are we claiming to be anybody that we're not stating. We're just 2 people that believe that conversations need to be had in order to actually seek that help and to seek that guidance. I also want to stress the fact that there are many different forms of aches and pains, and obviously with that entailment, and that is also a very trauma trigger point. However, today's topic is going to be designated and narrowed down to the actual heart and actual like feeling, and how like women and how people in general deal with that ailment, and how it's not necessarily that easy to accept rather than a different type of grief. So I think that's really cool. I think this is a conversation that needs to be had. I'm actually very, very proud of the females that are in my life because, subhanAllah, it's just becoming such a positive movement seeing people use their voice, people use their strength and vibrate and use their kalam for kalam that's actually good and that's going to benefit people. And I know, Ma'ali, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I want to stress this in the beginning too, is we're here to guide and we're here to like empower everybody. It's not necessarily dictated towards a specific kind. However, obviously the youth is where the future lies. And so we are in no shape, way, or form trying to dictate on how people should deal with their stress. However, I think it's very, very important to recognize that people do go through these things.
Right. Okay, so I think the first thing we can start by just talking about and reflecting on, what defines heartbreak to you, Shaymat?
Mhm. Okay, so I just a little background story about who I am and what I have. I was diagnosed with MS, which is multiple sclerosis. Which let me see if you guys can see my shout out. Woo woo! But
I love that,
basically,
by the way. I see it in some of your other videos, and I'm like, I love that.
So basically, Shay Strong was actually created because of all of the hardships that I've been through, and honestly, a lot of that comes from the annulment of what you would call a heartbreak, if you will, because there's different ways that we can recognize this word heartbreak, right? And yeah, there's an emotional heartbreak. Yeah, there's that tragedy, like we were talking about with that grief and losing somebody and whatnot. There's so many words to this word. And how I truly experienced my catastrophic heartbreak was when I felt like I broke my own heart in a sense because I didn't feel good enough. So getting this really, really big diagnosis that shifted everything for me and my family, for how people viewed me and how I viewed myself. And for somebody that has strength and always been about, using your voice for impact and stuff like that, that really did a number on me. That really did something that like triggered an emotional response that obviously reflected in wanting to be closer to people, wanting to nurture people, because when you lack something, you obviously want to give it. And obviously that comes with blindness, and then you get your heart broken whenever you're realizing that this stuff is happening. So I think it's important to realize that it doesn't necessarily need to be 100% emotional. I mean, we trust people and our hearts get broken all the time, but it's in a sense that something happened to our emotional well-being, and we need to talk about that. Whatever caused it, we need to talk about the fact that our emotional well-being has been affected. So again, have I ever had somebody look to me and we're like, you know what, Shayma, you've been through a lot. Like, what can I do for your heart? Nobody's ever done that to me. So I think it's very important for people that are in our shoes that have experienced their fair share of hardship and heartache to pass on that nurturing, to pass on that watering almost, because it's very important. And I know, and we have all of these heart to hearts so often. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah. So you said something that really stuck out to me, right? So you said something about emotions, right? And so I think a lot of people in general, right, we're kind of entering this new phase in society where people are starting to talk about feelings and emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a while it was something that people were in denial of, right? Like even when it comes to health and mental health, people would talk about like, oh, physical health, right? If you're going through something that's really devastating emotionally, people would be like, oh, it's all in your head. It's an illusion, right? And that can be very, very unhealthy because it's very dismissive of the pain someone's going through. And what people don't recognize or they don't realize is things like, mental illness, right? Or heartbreak, for example. They actually have a physiological effect on you, right? There's a lot of chemistry. There's a lot of you have neurotransmitters in your brain, right, that react differently and respond differently to different situations that you go through. And so there's actually this medical I believe it's a diagnosis, right? I'm not a doctor, but from what I've read, it's called broken heart syndrome, right?
Sure.
And then the medical term for that is, I actually wrote it down. Let me just see where I wrote it. It's called stress-induced cardiomyopathy, or Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I've done reading on this in the past when I was going through my own types of experiences and heartbreaks, right? Because I went through something that, was emotionally distressful for me, but I was having physical symptoms. I was feeling like I felt like debilitated. I couldn't get myself up. I was having physical weakness, right? I was losing weight. My body was changing. The glow in my face was changing, right? I was having all these physical symptoms to something that was emotional that I couldn't even speak about because at that time, there wasn't really a safe space where you could talk about things like that. You couldn't say, hey, I'm heartbroken. I went through this situation or that situation, right? There was a lot of judgment associated with it. And I was younger at that time. I was in my early 20s, right? So that's a very sensitive and critical age because you're still figuring yourself out. And a lot of people may not have the necessary language developed to articulate themselves very well by that age when it comes to emotions. And so I started reading and researching about like, what am I going through? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling like this? And that's kind of when I came across, the whole thing with broken heart syndrome. And I continued to read on it and read about it and even share some of the information I found with friends who would go through different forms of heartbreak as life went on, right? And so what happens with this is that when a person goes through that severe emotional distress, there's actually a part of the heart, from my understanding, that expands physically and it becomes a little bit larger than the other parts of the heart. And it feels very similar to a heart attack, although it's not.
Right.
Very rare cases do people die from it.
Mm-hmm.
But it does occasionally happen. And I think we've all heard of the story of the lovely couple who spent their entire life together. And then, the husband passes away. And shortly after, a week later, the wife dies of a broken heart. These things are real. They happen. Right. In most cases, a person that goes through that, they usually recover within several weeks where the heart just kind of like gets back to its rhythm and whatnot. But it's extremely, extremely devastating because it's not just the heart that gets affected. There's so many other things in your body that get affected, right? So what happens when you fall in love or when you become attached to something, right, is that your brain chemistry changes, right? So you have like neurotransmitters in your brain, right? Oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and these all contribute to a sense of peace and harmony and like well-being mentally and physically in your body, right? So oxytocin is like I'm going to say chemical, but I believe the word is neurotransmitter that helps you, or it doesn't help. It gives you that feeling of love and attachment. So like studies have shown that when a mother first delivers her child, and like she holds the child, that physical touch, or if she's nursing the child, the levels of oxytocin increase upon a loss. So when when you're physically close to someone, you hug someone, you hold someone, you touch someone physically, right? In cases where people are intimate in marriage, right? The level of oxytocin increases and you become attached to that person on a biological level. So people don't really see this on the outside. And if you've never been in a situation where you've been heartbroken, sometimes you could be kind of ignorant to the suffering that someone's going through, and their pain is actually real, and it affects the way they perceive the world and the way they show up and the way they are, right? They're actually, it's like a physical illness, but it's inside, you can't see it. So serotonin is your like happy-go-lucky neurotransmitter, right? It makes you feel happy, at peace. And then dopamine is the one associated with pleasure, right? So when you see people that are gamers and they're addicted to gaming, or people addicted to their cell phones, right? That messes with your dopamine because all of these things give you like quick satisfaction, quick pleasure, right? And so what happens is when these are thrown off because of a situation, because of a trauma, because of unhealthy habits, it causes disturbance, right? And so you no longer feel at peace. Right? You could develop anxiety, you can develop depression. So usually with heartbreak is that someone becomes attached to someone else, right? And if they reach the point of physical intimacy, let's say hypothetically in marriage, right? I want to say biological chemistry, but again, I'm not a doctor, so I hope I'm using the right terminology, but it actually changes. Right? So this person that you might not have had that much of an attachment to before. And, people think, for example, divorce or breakups might be so easy because it's like, oh, I lived without this person for 20 years before. I can live without them just fine after, which is very unrealistic because during that time you spent together, everything about you changes, right? So you actually develop somewhat like I want to say a physical or physiological addiction to that person. And so other studies have been made that compared um, heartbreak to cocaine and drug withdrawal.
Yeah.
And, I wish I had them off the top of my head right now. I used to just keep them stored and share them with people going through heartbreak to kind of reassure them. But I'd have to look them up again. But they've done studies and they showed that, like, I think it was cocaine withdrawals and drug withdrawals in general were, I believe, not as severe as what someone goes through in heartbreak, or they were equal. So think of a
Mm.
person that's going through a drug addiction and how difficult and devastating that is to their life, and the process of recovery and therapy and all of that they have to go through to recover from that drug addiction, because those drugs mess with their brain chemistry. Or when you go through an emotional attachment with with another human being, or with whatever it may be, and you're heartbroken or you're shaken, that's kind of similarly to what happens, right? And that's why people can spiral into depression. They can spiral towards, God forbid, suicide, right? I've seen people have, some of the most devastating mental breakdowns, right, because of these things where, they had some really difficult experiences like hospitalization and things of that sort because of an emotional distress. So, like, again, this topic is so important that we talk about it and we normalize it, because a lot of people are very dismissive in our community, that when someone's heartbroken, it's kind of like, oh, you'll get over it. Oh, your heart will heal, right? But what does the process of getting over it look
Look
like?
like. Right.
And how are we supporting that? And
Right.
how are we validating those people's feelings?
Right.
And, and yeah, we don't want to become enablers and let someone just kind of like wallow in misery and just never get out of it. But at the same time, we need to make space to validate that what you're going through is real. It's not just in your head. Well, it is kind of in your head, but it's something that's actually taking a toll. Your emotions.
Manifesting. It's manifesting
Yeah.
in physiological ways. Which you said something that I want to like. What I really want to take that and kind of like drench it a little bit. Benny Adam. So the people of Adam and Eve, right? We are not meant to be alone. This idea of like self-independency and like being this like macho man that can handle all, where that's not how human beings are created. That's not what our purpose is. That's not what we're meant for. So obviously we gravitate towards that feeling of nurturement, that feeling of love, that feeling of like attachment, which then will reciprocate when you get comfortable enough, will reciprocate to identities of love, which then lead to attachment, which then leads to like an addictive, which all of these things, if it's beautiful and if it's healthy, obviously that's the goal. That's what everybody wants, right? But there's something that I want to talk about, this phenomena of divorce people. Okay. And I want to say this as a single woman that's never been married before, that's very particular about the choosing of a spouse and things like that. I want to specify this. It's really sad to me knowing that our community looks at people that get divorced or that had that divorce, which, everything happens for a reason. And if you got divorced, I truly believe God was saving you from something bigger. But in the midst of that, obviously you're not seeing that, you're not feeling that, you're feeling that heartache and that heartburn. But what really, really drives me insane is that gets so minimized so quick. Like, I've never in my life heard of a divorced lady talking about heartbreak, because, and we forget that that's an ailment, because usually when you hear about divorce, it's they're already up to here, they're ready to get divorced, and we just hear about the bad stuff that happened to lead them to that final calling. But what about the pain? What about the actual feeling that made them decide that, you know what, it's done? Like, what about those feelings? Because me, I recognize it. I can recognize that in the community of health, it's like it's very bad. But at least if I sit here and I say like, I'm sad, somebody will recognize that in the community. Somebody will look at me and be like, you know what? I get it, and I understand why you're sad. But then you turn around and you have this like this notion for divorced females, where I feel like they have this like they have to have this look where they're not allowed to feel some type of way, where they're not allowed to even say that they were hurting. Which in reality, that's probably one of the biggest severing of one of the strongest investments that you made. And I mean, listen, investments go wrong all the time, but when you have an investment that you thought was going to be your lifelong investment and that got taken away from you, you guys, how are we not going to be people to talk about it? How are we not going to be looking at our brothers and sisters and how come the only thing that we have to say about these people is, oh, they got married, so let's see if they might get married again. Like, it's always on to the next. It's so dismissive, it's so repetitive to the point where there's no growth. It's almost like I have to like hide it, and I have to learn how to hide it, or I'm going to be labeled as crazy, dramatic, this that. And it's like, where's the validation for people that are actually going through stuff to start feeling better? Now, if I had somebody that looked at me and was like, hey, Shema, I recognize you're going through pain. I recognize you're going through hurt. I recognize this stuff. Like, even by you just telling me that you could see it in me is going to make me want to work better. But we don't even have that right now. And I don't want to like dismiss the community that we're building now, because like even yesterday, right? Yesterday I was doing a whole different show, and we have people that are putting in the work now that can recognize that there are issues now, and they're starting to be able to say, you know what, these are conversations that we need to have. But Mani, we're one too. You know, we're one two people. We're people that recognize that it needs to start with somebody. So we're okay with putting ourselves under the bus. And we had this conversation earlier. It needs to start somewhere. It needs to begin with people that are okay with being uncomfortable. And for whatever reason that may be. See, subhanAllah, what connects you and I together is our hearts have been filled with pain. Like, we have that in common. And subhanAllah, it makes, I feel like if anything, that connects me more with you. So this notion about heartbreak, and yeah, it's a bad thing and whatnot, but I want people to understand that when you're going through stuff that are big and bad in your life, look around to the people that are still comforting you. And Mali, you do this for so many people, you do it for me. Because like, and I know you do this for other people, because people are so gravitated, especially when it comes to this conversation. You just said it. You have stats for days. You're reassuring people to let them know that they're not the only ones, or they're not alone, or whatever the case may be. And it's so important that we, like you said, that we normalize people to do things like this, so we know how to grow as a functioning community. So I think it's really important that that not only do we recognize what heartbreak is, but we recognize that it's okay if people want to talk about it. It's not complaining. It's getting it off our chest. And that's everything. How good would it feel just to know that you'll have somebody that will just let you rip off whatever you have, no judgment, no confinement, and just pure listening, pure wholehearted advice. You know, that's very rare to have, and that's sad that we come from a community where now we have to create it because we can see the suffering behind us, you know?
I wanted to just jump in and talk a little bit more about a couple things you mentioned that really stuck out to me. So divorce, and I'm so glad you mentioned this. So you said something along the lines about like divorce, and people kind of like they fixate on the divorce itself and the label, right? And so what I always like to remind people is when, you know, like when someone finalizes a divorce and the news is kind of out there, a lot of times the heartbreak happens way before the divorce, right? So the person can be in a marriage and it could happen gradually or overnight, right? And, you know, whatever it is, that relationship, there are different incidences that are just chipping away slowly and slowly away at that relationship and breaking that person's heart, right? Or both people, right? It could be the lack of compatibility and just kind of like the clashing personalities just breaking one another's hearts, whether it's intentional or not, right? And so a lot of times by the time a divorce is finalized, the person's pain is like long, they're beyond the phase of being heartbroken. I don't know if that makes sense, but I realized that sometimes people are just so sad about the divorce and the term and the label that they almost don't recognize that the pain and the heartbreak and the agony and I guess the misery that was going on before that led to the divorce was the actual issue, right? To just be a little more critical the way we look at things, because nobody, you know, I don't think anybody wakes up saying, hey, I want to be a divorcee, right? When I grow up, right?
Right.
No, people usually go into a marriage hoping for the best, but just circumstances, things don't work out. Maybe one person is negligent of fulfilling the rights of the other. So many different, reasons for relationships not working out. But there's almost always an element of heartbreak in most of those situations, right? And then heartbreak can also happen outside of marriage. And I think in our community, we don't talk about that enough because we're so afraid of like promoting haram relationships. And I think there's a very fine line between promoting the haram and just recognizing that sometimes people do develop feelings, in a perfectly halal manner where they become very emotionally invested, and for one reason or the other, things don't work out and they're absolutely devastated, right?
Right.
And so I've heard even public speakers, and I'm sure they take it back now, that are, Muslim public speakers make the mistake of saying things like, or minimizing the effect of heartbreak when it comes to someone not being married, and saying, oh, some people, they get really depressed because they didn't marry the person they wanted to, and just being very dismissive about that and saying, why would they be depressed about that? And I have a problem with that because I know a lot of people that experience that, and rightfully so, because you not being with the person you intended to be with changes your life trajectory, and that is something that could be very devastating, right? For a person that may have felt led on, or may have had families involved and thought that this was their forever person or whatnot, right? So I think it's just a lot more nuanced, and people need to be like really sensitive about the way they talk about all of this. So you also mentioned something about like divorce happens, and we believe as like Muslims, believers, practitioners of of most faiths, that everything happens for a reason, right? And there's wisdom behind it. And yeah, I agree with that, right? But it doesn't make it less difficult to go through, right? And so there's a process and work that's required, like internal work and spiritual, emotional, personal development that you need to put in, right? That level of work in order to get through that phase. If that's what God intended to test you with, a divorce, then there's a lot of work that needs to go in navigating that test, right? It's not like khalas qaddar Allah ma sha fa'al and you just sit back and kick back. No, because you're a human and you're having a human experience with this. Yes, it's qadar. Yes, we accept that some things happen as they are, and we need to accept them and move on. But how do we move on? What does that look like? How do we navigate that? How do we support people that are going through something like that? And again, like, I want to, just issue a reminder that, like, therapy is helpful for a lot of people. I'm not going to say it's helpful for everyone, because to be honest, I know people that have had worse situations because, whatever, therapy didn't help them, or the therapist they were with wasn't as effective as they should have been. However, I've heard of people that have had complete life transformations through therapy. So I think it's something that if you're going through a rough time, you should explore and entertain. Most health insurances will offer you therapy as part of like your health coverage. So it's something you should give a try. But also what's equally as important, in my opinion, is having a healthy support system. And in my opinion, to be honest, I think having a health support system is more important than therapy, because when you have that love that you're surrounded by as you're going through difficult times, that can be more therapeutic than speaking to someone that, that you might feel is a stranger. Although they might have the tools and the expertise to help you navigate a situation, it's not, you need to have a support system. So if you don't have one, reach out to people that you feel are trustworthy and try to develop those relationships if you're going through something. Go ahead.
No, you said something that I just want to like reiterate that too. So you said that like having a support system is more important in your opinion than actually seeking therapy. Well, I want to take it up a little bit and say that having that support system is a form of therapy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, I truly believe that, like, okay, so for example, I've seek professional help, right? So and I'm not gonna lie to you, it was a very, very, very bad experience for me. Okay, like it was a very bad experience. It was just a really bad experience. However, am I gonna be the person that says like, no, I'm not gonna try therapy anymore, that? No. But what I can recognize is when I started therapy, I was already at a level that I was so low. So by the time therapy got to me, it wasn't doing much because I was still negative. So it was pouring in, but I was like, let's say I was at negative 100. So it's taking me to like negative 70, negative 60. I really cannot see much of it because I'm still negative. Now, moreover, this idea of preparing or building our true identity. So building our true self. So when you're building your true self, you're also building people that you're surrounded by that are going to support you because they, for whatever reason, can see your potential in the moment that you're going through. So I think that having those people is a form of therapy. Something that me and you also talk about a lot is, and maybe we should talk about this on a different show or a different on a different view, is the importance of support and having that support and what that actually looks like. Because coming from a girl that's, again, very, very vocal, so I talk about my problems. I'm not that type of person that keeps it in. I do the work. I'm so when they say, hey, find somebody that you can talk to, this, that, I'm going. I'm looking for people to talk to. I'm trying to figure out how to use my voice and articulate the words to figure out. And then when you're doing it, when you're finally like, oh my God, I finally got it, guys. I finally know what this word is. It's hard. I don't feel it. It's heartbreak. It's this. It's that. You start to feel this stuff, and you still get the door slammed in your face. So it's very, 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 very important. And honestly, if you do have one or two people in your life that are your support system, you guys, wallah, send them a text right now. Shoot them a message, hug them, kiss them, do whatever you got to do, because that's a ni'mah min Allah. That's very, very rare, and it's not something that a lot of people have. Like I personally, I don't have that. You know,
a lot of people don't. You can always hit me up, Shayma.
Girl, you already know.
Anytime, honey.
You already know. But like, it's sad. It's sad that like growing up to that point where like I like now in my life, I can say I finally developed my network where I can reach out to people. Alhamdulillah. But I'm 25 and I have a professional background. You know what I mean? What about people that don't do what I do? What about people that are not vocal? What about people that are just suffering and they actually need somebody to go up to them, Ma'ali? What are we doing for those people?
So, I'm so glad you mentioned that, right? Because what Shayma said is so on point. If you do have people in your life that you can turn to, say alhamdulillah, because that's more precious than gold. A lot of people in this life, and inshallah, I eventually want to do an episode on loneliness. I have a whole list of different episodes we need to talk about, and that was one I added. Loneliness is so real. And again, I'm a nerd, so I read up about this stuff. There are also physical effects and psychological and body effects to loneliness, right? And even with elderly people and people who have pets, they have less effects of loneliness. That's a whole other conversation, inshallah, we'll have. But having people by your side as you navigate life's struggles is an extremely beautiful blessing. And you should be very grateful if you have that. For those of you that don't, what I learned in times that I felt alone in my suffering is I did look inwards. I did connect a lot with God. That was, very, very powerful for me. But I also thought about, if I'm going through this, there are chances that other people are feeling similar things. And once I had that realization that you are not alone in your suffering, then it kind of empowers you to want to be that person for yourself and for other people. And then when you start being the person that you would want for yourself, then subhanAllah, it's like God kind of brings like-hearted minded people together, and then you're able to that was literally my best friend. I was thinking of her when you were talking about and I was like, I should give her a shout out. She's calling right now, but I'll call her back later. Okay, I think we were talking about having people in your life, that how that's so therapeutic and helpful. And so it also I want to talk a little bit about healing, right? Because when you're in that darkness, I think what you want to know is how to get out and if it's ever going to pass, right? And subhanAllah, the human has such capacity for resilience, right? So although we talked about how your brain chemistry can completely shift when you're going through heartbreak, or you're going through that kind of a trauma, there is always hope for healing and recovery. And so there's this concept that I love. It's called neuroplasticity. So neuro, like the brain, and plasticity, like the word plastic. And what it means is that your brain is not just structured and wired one way. Your brain actually has potential, and this is more recent scientific discovery. Your brain has potential to rewire itself. I'm going to do some book recommendations at the end of this video, and maybe I'll give you some book recommendations on this topic, but I have some about heartbreak. Anyhow, so your brain has the potential to rewire itself. but it's not easy work, right? It's like when you go to the gym, you can restructure your body or get like a new type of body if you do certain exercises, right? You want bigger biceps, you do certain, I don't know, bicep curls, whatever. You want abs, you do ab exercises. So depending on what you put work on developing, you can actually mold things a certain way. So recent, like, you know, medical whatever discovery research, they discovered that the brain has a similar potential, and that's what neuroplasticity is. So when you're hung up on something, you're hung up on someone, you think you can never get over a relationship, a past relationship, a divorce, whatever it might be. You know, sometimes people experience heartbreak through other relationships, right? They're a parent, someone, a child that betrayed them, right? Whatever
Their
that
health,
heartbreak is. Mhm. I'm
their
sorry, I
health.
didn't hear you. Yeah, health can be really devastating. And I know, Shayma, I want you to speak more on that, inshallah, in a few minutes. I know I've kind of had my own like chronic pain issues that I was dealing with, and that was so devastating for me because it really just changed your life trajectory, right? And so that could be heartbreaking in its own way. But when what you therapy and, you know, all sorts of other different types of things that you do, like learning something new, these things can actually help rewire your brain. You're actually creating new neural pathways. And so I think it's Dr. Joe Dispenza that says um, nerves or neurons that fire together, wire together, right? And so there's research about like when you are trying to like, you know, create a new self, you're trying to move forward. When you learn something new, the more you repeat, like when you're learning something in school and you have to do practice exercises over and over and over until you master it, right? The more you repeat something, the more you are firing those neurons and those, and you're creating pathways. So you're actually rewiring your brain. And I think this is fascinating stuff because when you realize your potential, you could pretty much become almost anyone you want to be, right? So it's pretty empowering to have that knowledge. Now, how that helps with heartbreak is when you're going through a heartbreak or some kind of like you know, a tough situation, knowing this when you're in that darkness will give you the hope that eventually you can find your way out, right? And so being resilient is something that eventually we'll have another talk about. It's extremely important, and having that grit and that perseverance to continue to push through that darkness as you're navigating what you're going through. And you know what? I'm going to say it up front. It's not easy. It's like a living hell. So as you're going through it, don't be so hard on yourself and be like, "Oh my God, this sucks. Why do I feel like this? I'm trying so hard to get out of this feeling. I still feel like I'm in a rut." Yeah, but you're progressing and you don't even realize it, right?
Right.
And I've heard people say things like, "Time heals all wounds," which I don't really agree with. I think sometimes it does, but within that time frame, you should also be doing some kind of work to try to assist yourself in the healing process, some kind of personal development, right? Learn something new. I think when a person's going through any kind of depression or anxiety or heartbreak, if you have the capacity, push yourself to learn something new. If you can
Right.
sign up for a program, if you can read a book, that is incredibly amazing for your brain because your mind is just going through like the shock and like all of this like imbalance. But when you're reading or learning something new, you're like exercising. It's kind of like exercising those muscles. You're forcing your brain to do something productive, and there's something therapeutic about it. It's gotten me through so much stuff. Like the amount of knowledge I have is probably a reflection of the amount of like hurt or suffering or grief I've experienced in my life, right?
Right.
But it's kind of a lot. Like that's kind of the upside is that when you're going through something, there's always like a silver lining, right? As believers, we do believe in that. So, yeah, having relationships to support you. If you don't have that, try to create that. Learning something new.
So
Pick
I
up
want
a
to
new habit.
I want to touch that somebody said in our comments, it says it's hard to move forward if you're in the same atmosphere. And I actually want to talk about that because I experienced that and we talked about that. I think this is actually how me and my Ali realized that we were so similar. My Ali told me something that I swear somewhere on one of my sticky notes in the back, it's somewhere written. Well, it's somewhere written here. But basically, she told me something that I want to share with you guys. Sorry, Ali, if I'm not looking at you in the camera, I'm looking at the live.
Oh, that's okay.
But basically, she told me something and I'll reflect it back to all of you. She told me, sometimes you have to understand that you have outgrown your environment. Okay? And a lot of times that's when we recognize that that's where the growth needs to happen. So, for example, I can recognize that in my life, I'm not happy for whatever reason, okay? And for me, that comes from comfort. I can tell that I'm not comfortable, which recognize to me that I'm not happy, okay? So that's just personally with me. So when I realized that I have outgrown my environment, it was a really big dimming factor on my life, okay? And I told myself, I don't want to be the person that says I can't grow in a situation where everything is negative. Listen, we live in a bubble. We live in a bubble. Dearborn, this community, this little Wayne County, whatever, it's a big, fat, humongous bubble. It's not that big, actually, but it's a bubble. And when you're living in this bubble, you're dealing with all of your fumes, you're dealing with all of your setbacks and your kickbacks and this and that and whatever. But there's two things that if you hold on to, regardless of where you are in your life, whether you're in the midst of the actual situation or you're 2 feet away from it or you're 2 miles away from it, whatever you are, if you have these two factors, these two lifelong valuable things in life, you will be able to get past this. And they're ready, consistency and repetition. Right? So if you are consistently and repetitively working on yourself in different ailments, right, then you will. That is the notion of success. That's literally the melody for anything that you want in life. Consistency, repetition. So for example, Maali made a very, very good point. She said, do something. She's a reader. I freaking hate reading. I don't like it. You know, it's just, for me, that's not my thing. But what I do like to do is I like to talk. I love to talk to people. So what I end up gravitating towards, I end up like involving myself in stuff like this, where I'm actually using my voice to help people in a way that I know best, which is just sharing my pain. So whatever that is, and I literally wrote it down, distract yourself. Distract yourself in ways that are going to better your character. Like, listen, distractions are here, they're there, they're everywhere. But if you find usable, feasible distractions and you utilize them for your actual life, that's the best thing that life can do for you. It's so important because, yes, we talk about heartbreak. And yes, we talk about this pain and this anger and all of that stuff. But Ma'ani, that's when we learn. That's when we learned that all of this life and all of what's going on is happening because of us. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's very important to understand that yes, we're going through stuff. Yes, there is heartbreak. Yes, there is like this needed conversation, but we're all doing the work. We're all doing the work. It's just, are we articulating? Are we able to put words to our actions? If the answer is no, then work on it. Because the minute you can figure out what you're actually feeling, that's power in itself. How many times have you felt something in your heart and you couldn't really nitpick it? You just knew it was some type of sadness or some type of ache. And if you said, "Oh, it's heartache," somebody was gonna label you funny. So we use this word heartache as this term that it's like very like dramatized and whatever, but it's real, people, and it's not in the necessarily soft stuff that we think. There is something that I do want to say, Ali, and I mean I know we kind of already talked about this in the previously, but again, heartbreak does not necessarily have to come from being in a wrongful commitment, okay? And I want to state that very, very clearly. We're not even talking about our past situations, so we don't even give people funny ideas. But what we will say is it happens, and it's time for people to recognize that it does happen. So, for example, if here's just a natural halal example that we can all relate to. We all know somebody that this has been to. This has happened to somebody in any of our lives, right? So let's talk about the man and the girl that wanted to marry each other. Let's say that Fulan and Fulana, okay? One is from the north, one is from the south, okay? They love each other, okay? They can't get married. So now they have the potential where they didn't do anything. They're fine. They're perfect. They're good. But they literally cannot get married because their parents are not gonna allow them to get married or whatever. You're gonna tell me that's not a type of heartache? That's not breaking something. That's not some type of devastation on somebody's heart. Like So again, let's start normalizing. And I love that we're doing this because we're gonna big time start normalizing these big problems that are happening in our community, and we're gonna start putting words to them and start holding people accountable for what's going on because it's time. It's time.
So I wanted to jump in on that. That situation's so common. I've heard it, I've seen it happen with people I know so many times. And you know what people don't realize? When you're responsible for breaking someone's heart because of your negligence, pride, racism, account, whatever, right? That's a big deal because, I've seen people in that situation where they literally did nothing wrong. They grew up together since they were kids. They went to high school, college together. They fell in love, although they kept, all boundaries, right? And they wanted to get married, bil halal, the right way. And the parents were just being difficult because of ignorant issues. And it didn't work out. And they had to move on with their lives and marry other people. And alhamdulillah, from my understanding, like the few situations I've seen, some of them turned out well, where they just kind of moved on with life and they were okay. Some of them, their marriages ended up in divorce, whatever situations, right? But those people, after going through that situation, were never the same. Like everyone that I know that's ever been through heartbreak has never been the same. And so we can look at it as a bad thing, but it can also, there's always silver lining, right? So there's this saying, not a saying, there's this concept in the Japanese culture. I think it's called kintsugi, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I don't know if I am, but it's a symbol of resilience, strength, and pretty much when they have like ceramic or some kind of like, I think it's just ceramic or maybe glass break, they believe that when you fill it with gold, you fill the cracks with gold to rebuild it. And I wish I could, like, I knew how to upload a picture, but you can just Google this when I'm done. That it makes it stronger than it was before it broke. So think about that for a second. You have, say, a teacup. It falls and it breaks, right? It's shattered. You pick it up and you put all the pieces back together and you fill the cracks with gold. It's going to be stronger than it was before it broke, right? And so we see that phenomenon kind of on a lot of things. That sometimes when something breaks and it heals and it repairs, it is often, if handled correctly and given the right tools and the right environment to heal, it's often stronger than it was the first time, which can be a good thing. But then what does that do? That's where you see situations where a person outgrows their environment. That's kind of what I meant by it. So a person that might have been comfortable living with family and they were okay with everything goes through this kind of a trauma, right? Whether it's a health issue, right, that just breaks their heart because everything that comes with health issues, right? Whether it's a heartbreak of not being with someone that you love, right? Or feeling betrayed by a relative, right? After you recover from that, you do see the world from a different perspective. And you've grown, right? If you do all the right work, you've grown through that experience. And it's very difficult to go to be comfortable in the same environment. You have to do a lot of work inside inner work to be able to kind of be in the same environment and be able to view things from a different perspective. Or sometimes you just outgrow it and you're just, your heart, your mind, your soul, your life perspective is bigger than what it was before you went through that experience. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that and to make sure that we're doing all of the work to make sure that we're growing through those experiences and not just suffering unhealed trauma where we're just going through life with wounds, right? So that's where the work comes in. You mentioned something about distractions. Distractions are good, can be good, but I think that they shouldn't be, like, balance is everything, right? So like you might want to distract yourself from the pain, but you also need to be tending to the wound, right? So if you have like a gaping wound, you cut your arm, right? You might want to distract yourself by not looking at it, but you still want to go to the doctor and try to like remedy it and make sure that it heals properly, right? So distractions have a place, but you also need to be doing some work on the side to allow yourself the potential to grow and heal from whatever circumstances like triggered your heartbreak or the struggle you're going through. So a little thing that came to mind about outgrowing our environments. I think it was Mufti Menk that gave this example, and I loved it, right? So he said something about, the fetus in the mother's womb saying to the twin, I don't know if it was Mufti Menk or it was just a meme I saw somewhere, but if you have two twins in the mother's womb, one of them turns to the other one, hypothetically, and says, do you believe there's life after womb, right? After being in the womb. And the other one's like, no way. Like, the darkness of the womb is all they know, that warmth, that comfort. They're being fed through their mother's umbilical cord. They're totally fine. They're just too comfortable there, right? But then, subhanAllah, what happens? Eventually, that child, that baby, that fetus grows. And when it outgrows its environment, what happens? It comes on to the next world. It grows into the next world, which is very traumatic for it, right? Because it comes out crying and it's scary and all this unknown that it's surrounded by. But then as it gets kind of the hang of the worldly life of the dunya, it's kind of constantly going through a similar growing process, right? But for the soul, right? Because we're going through this life as a human experience, right? Spiritual beings in a human experience. So as you go through like similar situations of like heartbreak or trauma, sometimes you're in this darkness where you're like, I can't see life beyond this. And maybe within that, you're going through a spiritual growth that you needed and you would not have had otherwise. And maybe that's the wisdom in God allowing you to go through that experience. And once you go through that growth, you emerge into a new life, right? And then and so on and so forth until we pass on to the next one, right? And so I want to tie in a little bit of faith to this, right? Like as believers, of God and afterlife, right? I constantly try to remind myself that my number one mission in this life is to preserve and protect the soundness of and the wholeness of my heart, right? So there's I think it's either an ayah or hadith, and I should have researched and confirmed this before, but it is authentic that says that on the day that we go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we face God, I believe it's an ayah, it says, Manat Allah biqalbin salim, the one that will be saved from, like that will be safe and at peace is the one that will come to Allah with a salim heart. Salim means like whole. Salim also means peace. It means surrendering. It means, sound, right? So you are given the responsibility in this world to protect the soundness of your heart. And we know that when you're born with fitrah, like every child we believe is not born with original sin. We're born with fitrah. We're born with a blank slate with a sense of like just complete, like our heart is still whole, regardless of physical or health issues a person is born with. Their spiritual heart, their soul, is in a state of peace and wholeness. And the journey of life, as they navigate it, can take hits on that. And your role as you navigate life is to try to protect that soundness. And sometimes you'll go through traumas that will make you question, right? It'll question your soul, your spirituality, God, this, that, right? And this is all stuff that's like in the Quran that Allah talks about, that like people, as they went, some of the greatest people, like the Sahaba and stuff, used to ask in the Quran, there's an ayah that says they would ask to the Prophet and Allah, when is help coming? And these are the best of people, right? So when you're in that darkness and you feel like, oh my God, when is God's help coming, right? Know that other people have felt that. And that's you having to put more effort to protect the soundness of your heart and to do what it takes to protect it, because you want to maintain that throughout this entire journey of life. So you need a lot of resilience for that. You need a lot of like self-reflection, a lot of spiritual growth, and it takes work, right? You can't just sit back and just not put any work into getting better. And I'll just mention one little thing, and then Shema, I'll have you like go on before we continue. Surah Al-Asr is one of my favorite surahs. Not because it's like the shortest or one of the shortest, although that's kind of one of them because I feel super smart and never mess up when I recite it. But also, subhanAllah, it's so profound. Like when I was going through dark times, that and an ayah in Surah Ibrahim got me through it, and it empowered me. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Break that down. وَالْعَصْرِ. Asr is time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by time. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ, right? God is telling us as time goes on, the insan is at a loss, right? That's the translation of it. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. So as time goes on, from the day you're born, you're at a loss. We're all at a loss. You're losing out on time. You're drawing closer to the time you have to go back to Allah. What is the exception? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. With the exception of those who believe. وَعَمَلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. So the second thing is amal. You're being proactive. عَمَلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. You're doing something good. Something salih. Something good. You're helping somebody. You're giving someone, you're lending someone an ear, a shoulder to cry on, right? You're doing something. Amal. You're not just sitting back and succumbing to your depression or whatever. You're trying, right? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. So they stuck with the truth So they stuck it out, they stood up for the truth, and they practiced sabr, patience. And inshallah, on another pod or another live, we'll talk about the difference between sabr and tawakkul, which is patience and complacency. This is another thing that we really have to talk about. But that surah, if you really reflect on it, we're all at a loss. And the only ones of us that are going to be successful are the ones that we take that into account. We have faith. We do amal with whatever capacity you have. Amalus salihat, do something good. Stick to the truth and try to be patient as you go through these things. And one last thing, sorry, before I hand it off to you, Shema. Surah Ibrahim, there's an ayah that talks about, and I can't quote it because I haven't practiced it. I'm going to make a fool out of myself, and I don't want to do that with the Quran. But there's an ayah where I remember I was going through a dark time and I was kind of feeling victimized in my situation. And then I heard this verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to, shaitan on Judgment Day is going to say, I did not have power over you. So when we're facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Judgment Day, shaitan is going to pull the rug from under our feet and say, don't blame me. Don't blame me, blame yourself. I had no power over you. All I did was da'utukum inni da'utukum fastajabtum li. I called to you to do something and you listened. You follow through. So it's all on you, right? So everything you think you're going through, that you want to shift blame on someone else, even with heartbreak, right? And I know heartbreak is tough. Do some self-accountability, right? Dig deep and say, you know what could I have done differently? How can I learn from this for my future? What accountability do I have for my own self-inflicted wounds? And how can I grow? And I just believe that self-accountability is so empowering.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I rambled on and on. Shema,
No,
go ahead.
I love that. And I do want to say, Fatima, we are, I didn't want to cut off Maali while she was speaking, but you said it's hard to talk to anyone nowadays because people are judging you. And unfortunately, we do live in a time where people are very judgmental and they don't necessarily understand. But I just want to encourage you to find people that will listen. Because if there's two people that randomly just went on a live today and we're both happen to be from a very secluded country that doesn't really do this much, and this doesn't really happen as often as it should. If we're doing this and there are people that want to listen to you, you just have to do your due diligence and your duty to find those people. And I encourage you, if you need somebody to talk to, I'm here, Maali's there, we're here for anybody and everybody that needs that help. We never had it, so we want to be able to make sure that everybody else has that supporting hand. There's another thing that I want to talk about, and I think honestly I might save it, and I wrote it down, so I might just save it for tomorrow because that might tie in better with tomorrow's conversation. But it is 9 o'clock, or it's 9:05. I don't see any questions running in, so maybe we can just, by giving our closing remarks, if somebody puts in a question, we can go ahead and answer that. My computer's literally on 4%, so if it dies, I'll just text you on the Zoom or on Instagram. But I do want to let you guys know that we will be doing these a lot more often. We're going to be talking about help me out, Maddie, tomorrow. Grief and pain.
Tomorrow, pain and grief. So it's going to be kind of like an extension of today's conversation.
And that's why I kind of don't want to extend the conversation over, because tomorrow is just going to be the part 2 of this. And I feel like if we continue on now, then there's not going to be a part for tomorrow. But it depends what the definition of judgmental, because a lot of people understand it wrong. Some people confuse it with having an opinion. Absolutely 100% true. But let me tell you something, okay? It is also your job to fester or to be able to recognize what you tell people, okay? So if that person is not going to understand what you've been through, then don't tell them. If you're just going to waste your breath and you're going to ultimately feel some type of way by explaining what you're going through to somebody that does not understand what you're going through, don't tell them. That's the wrong person to get any type of comfort from, right? So if you're experiencing that and somebody is, they're just not understanding, I'd rather you literally talk to the wall. Because at that point, what is that getting to you, right? So if you can't find it in your nature to help somebody understand, then that's not your place. You're already suffering. You're already going through the most. You don't need to add another ailment on top of what you're already dealing with. And I'll talk about that tomorrow in depth because Ma'ali, if there's the queen of anything, that's the queen of me. I always feel guilty for feeling sad because of what I'm going through. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. And I know exactly what you mean, and I really, really want to dive into that. But at the same time, we really want to just remember that you, like Ma'ali said, we want to hold ourselves accountable to everything. Remember that at the end of the day, even Satan himself will not be like responsible for what goes on in your life. It's you. You got to take advantage and you got to take a hold of what's going on in your life and just move forward. And I say take advantage because you can literally take advantage. When you're going through a situation, there is so much room for growth in that situation. We talk about the silver lining, and that silver lining is the fundamental development of our entire being, right? So if you're always sad, if you're always happy, how often are you going to recognize happiness, right? But when you have, or when you're in these ailments of like sadness, or when you're going through a ruckus or a hard time, or whatever the case may be. Oh, there goes my laptop, Annie.
That's okay. Facebook was being weird anyway, so we'll have to figure out the technical stuff next time. But
yeah,
go ahead.
I think, but I just, where was I going with that?
You were talking about self-accountability and
yeah, so self-accountability, which then will reach out to your spiritual growth.
Right.
So when you have accountability to yourself, nobody else is holding you judgment to yourself. You're literally you're doing it for you. You're doing it for you. So subhanallah, when you give yourself that little bit of responsibility, you're giving yourself that much respect. You're giving yourself responsibility. You're giving yourself an aura, right? And that's what strong people look like. It's our aura that resonates to people. It's the way we talk. It's the way we move. It's the way we can connect. But listen, it's not to say that we're not all suffering. We are. We all go through our different ailments. But how do we differentiate that? How can I say I go through my stuff, but I'm still through my diligence? Because I'm holding myself accountable. I'm holding myself accountable to every single thing that's going on in my life right now. And again, inshallah, we'll talk about that more tomorrow because with grief, with pain, with all of that stuff, it's almost so hard to navigate through that pain. And again, we'll talk about that. And you know what, Maddie, maybe tomorrow we should focus on giving solutions too.
Yeah, you know what, before we do wrap up, I just wanted a couple more minutes to mention some stuff. Like I noted stuff down that I'm like, oh, I don't want to forget mentioning this stuff to them. So I'm just going to go through. Okay, good. Because I'm like, this is such a big topic. I'm like, dang, you know what? It's not even enough time, but I'm going to go through these real quickly. And then inshallah, if after tomorrow's conversation, you guys want us to continue having more in-depth conversations on this topic, we'll do like an Instagram poll and then we'll continue it. But I did want to mention a few other things, right? So as Muslims, right, and I feel like our community is lacking in this, right? Which is so sad because our faith teaches so much about caring about other people. I hope I didn't lose you. Your screen is dark. I don't know.
I'm
okay. To grab some water. Oh, that's cool. As long as you're still there. So we believe in honoring a fellow believer and just humanity in general. To the point that like even their wealth, their honor is haram upon you. Yet it's become so common and normal to get involved and lead people on and break their heart and just be like, it's okay, they'll be fine, they'll move on, right? This is not okay. Like I'm a big believer that we were not created, like humans were not created to experience heartbreak that often, right? Where it's like it's become so normal for people to just like, oh, you know, this person and I, we're going to get married, it didn't work out because the person flaked out, the person didn't follow through on their commitments, the person was negligent, right? You can't go around interacting with other people in life so carelessly with their hearts, right? You need to establish healthy boundaries. For one, prevention is better than the cure, right? So don't give your heart so freely to the wrong people, but at the same time, excuse me, like don't be that person either that's going around and just like, you know, comfortably playing with people's emotions and literally breaking people's hearts and being like, oh, well, whatever, they'll move on, we'll move on, I'll move on. No, not everybody's that resilient. You have to be extremely careful with how much of yourself you give to people and how much you lead others on, because some people are a little more sensitive, some people are a little more trusting, right? And you will be held accountable amam Allah for like the suffering that you put another person through, because it's not just feelings. Like we talked about how it has physical effects, how it sets someone back. Like people give up their jobs because they can't function for months because they're processing this pain they can't talk about. So be very mindful in the way you interact with people when it comes to really deep emotions, and have an ethic of trust with the way you deal with people, even when it comes to their feelings and their and promises you make about the future. So it's a really serious matter. I just don't think people should toy with it. We should know better. um, Also validate the pain people are going through, recognize it, acknowledge it, give them space. If they're going through something, don't make them feel like you know judged or ashamed to be expressing that they're going through a hard time. Some solutions too, like journaling, prayer, exercise, um, better diets, therapy. Seek support from your trusted circle or others. Sometimes your trusted circle, they don't know how to support you. Reach out to other people. You'd be surprised how many other people, as long as they're people you feel are trustworthy, would be able to just lend you an ear, right? And again, be careful who you're vulnerable with, because some people don't have the capacity to support you in the way you need, but a lot of people do, right? um, and then, inshallah, maybe tomorrow in our pain and grief conversation, we'll talk about the possibility of, like, is there a different experience for men and women? What are the similarities for men and women going through heartbreak, and what ways is it different? Because there are social differences, right, that make certain things more difficult for, say, men or women to process, right? And so we can talk a little bit about that in regards to pain and grief. Um, so, book recommendations about this topic that I would suggest. I'm currently reading this book. A friend of mine recommended it. It's pretty good. It's called All About Love, Bell Hooks. So, it talks about, it's from a female author. So, it talks about love in different forms. It talks about it being inspired by divine love. As Muslims, we're supposed to root all our acts of love in the love of Allah. And when we reflect deeply on that, it makes sense, and it's the most holistic form of love. But at the same time, a lot of people don't have that, that information. Inshallah, maybe another time we'll talk about that. Yasmin Megahed's Reclaim Your Heart. This is a really good one if you're going through heartbreak, because she talks about kind of reclaiming your heart and connecting it to God, first and foremost, so that all of the love that you receive from the outside world is just kind of like icing on the cake, but you're still so whole and you're so full on the inside because you have Allah's divine and eternal love within you, right? And how to work towards it and things like that. The last book I read, or I want to recommend, really good book, A Temporary Gift by Esma Hussein. This is about a woman whose husband was killed in Egypt. I think it was during a protest. And she just talks about her process of like recovering from that. And this is like a tearjerker for me when I read it. I don't know, I haven't read it for years. I read it in 2015 when it first came out. I have not read it in years, so I don't know if it still had the same effect on me. But I was going through something when I read it, but I might pay it another visit soon. So these are some books you can check out. And yeah, feel free to hit us up. I'll post like a poll or something on my Instagram after this, just to kind of get some feedback from you all, and just, see if you guys want us to talk more about this topic or anything else. Oh, and last thing, it should be the first thing. Another book that's great for healing, obviously, if it's not already obvious, is the Quran, right? I know that's hard for a lot of people, but to be honest, when I was younger, yeah, I had that disconnection to it until I was going through some of my own difficult situations. And alhamdulillah, like I started to find inspiration from it, and it helped with a lot of my healing and continues to help when I'm going through a jam. So try to also make space for that in your life if you're going through a hard time. It's got like a lot of blessings that are like, obvious and not so obvious. And thank you all for joining us. Shema, you want to wrap up with anything else? Well, wait. Someone said something about read the Quran, but reading other books is not wrong. The Quran does not solve all problems. Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah, of course. I'm not saying limit yourself to only the Quran. Absolutely not. The Quran is not the only book you should be reading. Obviously, I just recommended 3 of them for you. So no, definitely keep your options open. Read as much as, the Prophet, there's a hadith, I believe, that said, take knowledge from wherever it comes. And our deen, the Quran starts with Iqra, so read a lot of books. Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to mention that. So you guys, obviously, whenever there's going to be a conversation, that normal people don't usually have conversations about, you know, there's going to be back and forth. People are going to have some stuff to say always, right? So just like how our young brother was having his issues to say, it is what it is, you guys. These are conversations that not normal people are having. In Ma'ali are comfortable being uncomfortable. We are okay with being people that have to be thrown under the bus. I'm totally okay with that. However, what we're not going to do is we're not going to mislead what we're saying. So we need to start like showing those people that it's not okay. So let me tell you what I mean by that, okay? So like, and I was just giving this to the couple of people that were hopping on the live, but when people are finally getting up to, they're having the courage or they're having the bravery to finally have these conversations that not normal people have these conversations with, it's not nobody's place. It's not nobody's place to tell them that they're doing it wrong or they're doing it right. We're doing it to the best of our ability because it's never been done before, right? So the little comments, like obviously we're staying positive, but in the line of positivity, we're also giving the things that we went through. And that's not something that you can take away from a person like me. Somebody that's watching my life can't hold what happened to me in the last few years. You can't take that away from me. I wish you could. Actually, no. Let me take that back. I wish you don't know because I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But that's what I'm trying to say. Is it's very, very important to stop giving people crap for something that you don't understand. And I think it's very important. My cat is going crazy. But like, look, he's just not leaving me alone.
Aww.
He's just like literally right under the camera. But I think it's very, very important. But and literally when it ended between us, I was just letting everybody know that we will be continuing to have these conversations. We're continuing to have one this time tomorrow. So 8 o'clock tomorrow, we're going to be doing pretty much like an add-on to what we were talking about today about pain and heartache and grief and stuff like that. And then, inshallah, next week we'll have another conversation for you and we'll keep it going that way.
Yeah.
But, Ma'ali, like I said, I'm excited that we're doing this because it's needed.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, it's definitely needed. And sorry about like flooding all you guys with so much info at once, but it was just such a big topic and we're trying to like put it in an hour. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I love it. I love that we're doing the work. We're showing people that it's okay to get uncomfortable. It's okay to have conversations that nobody really wants to have. If you don't want to speak, but you know that there's something that somebody needs to speak about, then just send it to go on the floor. Send it to either Ma'ali or send it to me, and then we'll figure out how to get it talked about or addressed, inshallah.
Yeah, I'll post a poll on my Instagram, and then you can post one too if you want them to send you. So I'll post a poll or like I'll open a question thing and just kind of like, you know, if you want to give feedback, constructive feedback. Like honestly, I'm not fazed by negativity or hate. I just like whatever.
No, and I am, and that's why we work so well together because we were kind of already new, but come on. Like we're ready. I'm surprised there was only 1-2 comments for real.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I think we misread them too. I think the person was like, "No, that's not what I meant."
No,
but
the one that you misunderstood, he was totally on Team Ali, like he was defending you and whatnot. But it was the other brother that I was addressing, but I don't know what happened with the Wi-Fi. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't bother because there are so many other people, and I think we know this for sure, just from like a lot of like how we're so social that benefit from like things like this. So I don't really get distracted by. You know, and those people usually when they go through their own thing, they end up coming back and like.
100%. But I also want to thank people like Jed, and I want to thank people. I didn't even catch that girl's or if it was that person's Instagram that are being like very interactive and feel the need to defend when people like us are using our voice and using our what we feel like is our purpose, our calling in this world. It's people like you that make us comfortable enough to do what we're doing. It validates somebody like me knowing that there are people that are listening to what we're saying, but also appreciate and respect and support what we're doing. So again, we'll talk about support in a whole different topic because that's just everything to me. But in the meantime, you guys, if you don't know how to help somebody, support somebody that is helping somebody. I think that's very, very important. I mean, mashallah, we're getting so much love and we're getting so much support now just by people watching. So I just definitely want to show those people that we're very, very grateful and we're very, 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 very supportive of anything that you guys want to do. Just reach out to us.
Alhamdulillah. Sounds good. Well, thanks so much. It was a great talk.
All right,
Thanks for
I'll see you
joining us.
tomorrow.